Today in today's talk, I mean, just as a general reminder, these events are recorded, so they will be uploaded on YouTube. If you don't agree with being recorded, just don't use your camera and your microphone. You can use the chat anyway. So the event of today, oh yeah, again, please mute your microphone and turn your camera off during the presentation. For the Q&A, please use the Teams chat tools. So, you know, the Tech Talks, I think we are, you all more or less know this format of event that we organize at the Brussels Privacy Hub, but I'm just going to summarize a bit the, how to say, the goal of these topics, these talks. So basically, we organized this talk since March. The idea is to, you know, we usually have full of events where lawyers explain the law to computer scientists. Now we try to do the opposite in these events. We try to take technologies and explain new technologies, usually privacy-enhancing technologies, to non-technical people. And the Brussels Privacy Hub is a great arena of many lawyers, activists, policy people, but also, of course, engineers, etc. And I already see in the chat that there are people from the computer science field too. So we very much welcome this interdisciplinary approach. In the previous events, we had the first event was about differential privacy, the second was federated learning, and the third was synthetic data. As you can see, the first three events were very much related somehow because they were all privacy-enhancing technology. Today, we are going a bit beyond our comfort zone, and we are going in a sensitive field, which is neural data processing, neurotechnologies. So we are trying to investigate one of the most sensitive areas of technology and law, technology and ethics, technology and policy. So this is the event of, this is like our panel today. I'm very, very honored to have two incredibly great guests. I will introduce them very rapidly. We have Ana Maiques. Ana Maiques is the CEO and co-founder of Neuroelectrics. She was nominated by IESE as one of the most influential entrepreneurs under 40 in Spain in 2010. She received the EU Prize for Women Innovators from the European Commission in 2014. And also she has been named more times as one of the most inspiring, the 50 most inspiring women in Europe. Her company, Neuroelectrics, develops record brain activity and stimulate the brain by administering small currents, while brain models and algorithms enable treatment to be customized to the needs of individual patients. But she will explain about that. It was just to give you a bit of spoiler about what is Neuroelectrics. But from the image of her that you can see in my slides, you can already try to understand how Neuroelectrics is dealing with the brain enhancement and how to say neuro technology in the more pure sense. And then we have as legal and policy and ethical discussant Dr. Marcello Ienca. Marcello is a senior researcher and principal investigator at the Department of Health Sciences and Technology at ETH Zurich in Switzerland. He's also a founding member of the Neurorights Network. He addresses ethical, legal, and social implications of neurotechnology and artificial intelligence, with particular focus on big data trends in neuroscience and biomedicine. I'm sure you, I think you might know his great work on these topics, on the right to mental integrity, to psychological continuity, and also he's in the steering committee of neurotechnology, steering group on neurotechnology of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, and also Council of Europe's ad hoc committee on artificial intelligence. So we have two very, very high level people here to talk about this topic. Thank you very much, both. Just to explain you a bit rapidly how we are going to deal with the presentation of today. Yeah, so we are a bit late, but since we have two panelists, we can deal with good timing anyway. So we are going to have a short introduction by Marcello about the topics on the table. Then Anna will introduce the more, let's say, tech talk in the more strict sense, and then Marcello will be discussant. Then we will open the floor for Q&A. You can use your microphone, you can use your camera, and you can anyway use the chat for the last 30 minutes. Just a short introduction. I mean, people are still coming because I think there were also previous meetings before. I will launch just rapidly because if I do it at the end, I might forget. The event of next time, so next tech talk will be about secure multi-party computation. We already can confirm Professor Alexandra Wood from Harvard, but we still are waiting for the confirmation of the tech experts. So we put an avatar. Sorry for putting a male one. It's a bit, sexist, but it was just rapidly now I was trying to find the good avatar for her or him. Okay, so now if Anna agrees that Marcello starts, we can rapidly make Marcello start for just an introduction of the topics on the table, and then we will go to Anna for some, let's say, insights on the topic. So Marcello, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Gianclaudio. And I'll probably keep it brief because I'm very curious to listen to Anna's introductory talk and learn more about the amazing research and technology that they're developing at Neuroelectrics. Maybe what I can do is to provide a very brief introduction to the topic of neurotechnology and try to explain to what extent this technology intersects with the debate over privacy and data processing, as you just introduced that. So neurotechnology, first of all, it's not a technology, but it's an umbrella term that is commonly used to describe a wide spectrum of relatively heterogeneous technologies and methods and systems and instruments. And the common denominator of all these technologies is that they can establish some direct connection pathway to the human brain. And through this direct connection pathway, human neuronal activity can be recorded and or altered. And these are the two keywords, recording and altering. If we want to look at neurotechnology from a functionalist perspective, we can identify two main subgroups of neurotechnologies. Technologies that indeed are used to read brain activity, if you pass me this metaphor, so that they can measure quantitative data about the human brain, in particular about human brain's structure, anatomy, function, and activity. And technologies that can alter, so modify brain function and activity, for example, through neuromodulation and neurostimulation. This distinction is very simplistic because a lot of technologies employ both methods. So they read and brain activity in order to then alter it to some extent. It's probably also may be useful to have a little bit of a historical framework around neurotechnology, because even though public policy debates around neurotechnology are relatively young and in a very germinal phase of development, neurotechnologies as such are not a very brand new technology, but this is something that neuroscientists have been working on for decades. The first electroencephalography, which still today, EEG electroencephalography is the most common way to record brain activity from outside the skull, so using non-invasive methods. Well, the first EEG was recorded in 1924 by Hans Berger in Germany. And many other neurotechnologies that are used in the clinics are a few decades old. Magnetic resonance imaging, which is a technique that can be used to record both structural and functional activity of the brain in an indirect manner, is a technology that was developed in the 1970s. Even the hottest topic in neurotechnology, namely brain-computer interfaces, is decades-old technology which originated in the 1970s. So at this point, somebody may ask, if these technologies are already a few decades old, why are we talking about them today? I guess there are a few reasons. One is that neurotechnology applications have been long researched in animal models with limited applicability to humans, especially invasive methods, so technologies that need to be implanted inside the brain and therefore need neurosurgery to operate. And in recent years, we have been seeing a much wider applicability of neurotechnology applications to human neuroscience. Second, we are seeing a rapid expansion of neurotechnology applications outside the clinical domain through an approach to neurotechnology development that is known as consumer neurotechnology. So as Ana will explain, neurotechnologies originated in the medical domain as a way to treat, assist, or support people with neurological and neuropsychiatric disorders. But today, many of these technologies are rapidly spillovering outside the clinical domain into a variety of commercial applications, including applications for neuromarketing, personalized use, neurogaming, and so on. And a third critical reason why we're talking about this is that as a consequence of this spillover from the medical onto the consumer domain, a very rich ecosystem of neurotechnology-oriented companies is growing. And I guess many people in the audience are familiarized with companies such as Neuralink, that are trying to leverage the power of neurotechnology, not only for medical purposes, but also for non-clinical use. And then finally, one other area that is that is causing this increased attention in neurotechnology is the combination of neurotech and artificial intelligence. This is an intimate relationship that operates at multiple levels, but the main two levels at which this relationship between neurotech and AI is operating is at the level of data analysis. So AI is providing very useful tools for analyzing brain-related data. Especially deep learning is proving particularly useful to make sense of brain-related data. And the second is the application of intelligent components to brain-computer interfaces in order to optimize the function of these technologies through the so-called closed-loop systems. And this is an application of AI that potentially can exert great benefit for patients by optimizing the function of these technologies, but at the same time, it raises new ethical challenges in terms of moral responsibility and free will and personal decision making. And this is the reason why in recent years, besides this very interesting technology development, which by the way, the neurotechnology market has recently passed the 10 billion United States dollar milestone, which is quite remarkable. We are also, the neuroscience community is increasingly working together with public policymakers at the national and international level in order to define the ethical and legal boundaries of these technologies. And for what is relevant for this audience, also in order to define the ethical and legal boundaries for the collection and processing of the data that these technologies can generate. And this data category has been sometimes labeled as brain data or neural data, which broadly conceived would refer to any data relating to human brain structure, function, and activity. So I think this is very rough and simple terms and the framework that we are operating within. And I apologize for some oversimplification, but I hope this can be to some extent useful to start the discussion.
It was perfect. Thank you so much, Marcello. You gave us a great background, and this is the goal of these events is, you know, to understand how, I mean, the future is going on, but as you told us, this is not just science fiction, and this is not just pseudoscience. This is something happening. This is something which has great amount of money behind, and this is something that has many benefits, not just risks. We have to balance the two things. So that's why we are very curious to hear from Ana. I will stop my presentation now, so that she could share her screen if she wants. And so, and I will self-restrained for further inputs after Marcello's, because I have many, but I will self-restrained. I just say, while we wait that Ana is launching her slides, that I had the pleasure to work with Marcello at a paper about mental data and data protection, which is on SSRN. So just to give food for thought for the Q&A, I'm putting in the chat, but it was already on the website. I put in the chat the SSRN link if you're curious about this, about whether GDPR is an adequate tool to protect mental data and brain data. So Ana, let us know if you are muted.
Yes.
You're muted again. Yeah.
Do you see my screen? Hi.
No, not yet.
Open. Share tray.
Yeah.
Can you see it now? No.
I think it's still loading. We cannot see.
I may, Gianclaudio, I may send it to you by email while I start my presentation. Maybe you can.
Yeah, sure.
You can. Let me see.
Yeah.
Well, great to meet you all. It's a pleasure to be here. As Marcello has pointed out, this is a very exciting time for neurotech in general. And I am super honored to be here with you. And my presentation is going to talk about the particular neurotech that Neuroelectrics has developed and the impact it has on patients. But also I'm going to bring the topic to neuroethics, because I think you are very interested in the legal issues, and I have participated in a number of events. So my idea is to show you why I think legal teams and legal brains should be paying close attention to this technology, right? So Marcello was mentioning how the technology that I'm going to show you now, this one, this is, I'm going to wear it right now. Let me see, while I send you the presentation. So this technology that I'm wearing right now, that you can see it, it's wireless. It's portable, so it has here an amplifier, and it has the particularity of doing two things. It's non-invasive, right? And all these electrodes that I'm wearing here, which can be up to 32, can do two things. They can monitor my brain activity, meaning they can get direct data from my brain. This is called EEG, or electroencephalography, which is the electrical activity of your brain, right? And the other thing they can do is they can inject very little currents into your brain. And this is called transcranial current stimulation, with the potential to modulate the brain, right? So what does this mean? This means that there is a non-invasive technology with the potential to be used home that can read and write on the brain. Pretty easy, right? If you think about Neuralink, they need to actually have surgery, open your scalp, right? Implant a device. but this you can do non-invasively, right? So some of the things are, this is really interesting for patients. Why? Because for the first time, I think that in the history of brain tech, the technology allows now to really send patients home with this technology and have them every day using this device, right? So this has the potential to both diagnose, but more importantly, cure diseases in ways we could not even imagine before, right? But it also has the other side, right? What happens on a consumer world, right? Or even on the medical world, right? If we really use this technology to access brain data, right? If you think of the revolution of Facebook, right, as a social media platform with all the privacy, all the political issues, and you can control whether you're connected or not on internet or whether you have an account in Facebook or not. But if you wear this technology, is a direct connection to your brain, right? So I think that's what makes this feel, deserving extra attention that not, for example, any other technological field that I can think of, right? So did you receive the presentation? No.
Not yet.
Oh, wow. I'll send you another one because I think
maybe it gets some, some minutes.
Anyway, if not, I will follow without the slides. So what is Neuroelectrics doing with this technology? Well, Neuroelectrics is doing two things with this technology. The first thing we are doing is a clinical trial towards FDA approval. There is no other device in the United States approved as a new therapy, right? So our first indication is epilepsy. Why? Because epilepsy is a pretty well characterized neurological disorder. With the EEG, we can track seizures, and 1/3 of the 60 million patients with epilepsy don't respond to medication. So can you imagine just stimulating areas of the brain, right? And then reducing seizures in patients that don't respond to medication. This is awesome. And the alternative is surgery. So if you're a patient with epilepsy that don't respond to medication, you have to get either a craniotomy, so removing the part of the brain that is creating the seizures, or an implanted device. So this is really interesting for Neuroelectrics, right? Because we cover these patients that are really in high need with a non-invasive solution. So we did our first 20 patients in Boston at Boston Children's, and we show with 10 days, 20 minutes of stimulation every day, we could reduce seizures 44%. Pretty awesome if you think this is non-invasive, right? And what we did in our study is personalized per patient. We had an MRI of every patient. We built a 3D model of their brain, and every patient was getting stimulation at different parts of the brain, depending where the focus was coming from. So it was truly personalized brain therapy, and now we are doing 190 patients in 25 US hospitals, and aim to become the first FDA clear device to be approved by the FDA. Also, because of the pandemic, we asked the FDA whether we could send our device to patients that suffer from depression, patients that normally are receiving either electroshock therapy or transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is another form of neuromodulation. And the FDA say yes. So amazingly, our devices are being shipped to depression patients that will not go to the hospital to receive 30 days of stimulation in their homes and see whether they can get better, right? So again, as Marcello was mentioning on Gianclaudio, this is already happening. This is not science fiction. There are patients and subjects all over the world receiving non-invasive brain stimulation, right? So, as a company, we are extremely proud to lead this, era and this field. But I think that maybe 2-3 years ago, I was exposed to my first ever neuroethics workshop. This was the Brain Initiative invited me to a workshop in Korea where all the brain initiatives of the world were getting together, right? I was also in an OECD workshop in Washington. So I got exposed to neuroethics very, very early. And you know what? I thought I was a good person. I thought I was a good CEO, and I chose the right path because I didn't choose to go consumer, right? I chose to go medical, right? But surprisingly, when I sat down and I I listened to all these lawyers, right? Like Ana Maiques and Karen Bopfar and all these academics talking about neuroethics, I came to the conclusion that they were asking questions that I never asked myself, right? So I am a medical device manufacturer. I have all the regulatory agencies checking on my company, right? The ISO quality systems, the FDA, I have the CE mark for different therapies. I am approved for medical treatment in Canada, Hong Kong, Korea, Malaysia, you name it, right? So I'm under a lot of regulatory revisions and reviews and so on, right? But there were questions that neuroethics were asking that none of these agencies asked me. So my conclusion is that even in the regulatory medical space, there are blind spots. And I will tell you what those blind spots are to me. So the first question, neuroethics were asking me is your technology, even if it works for depression or epilepsy, is it changing the identity of your patient? Mm-hmm. That doesn't appear in any informed consent on any of my trials, right? Is your technology, because you're stimulating the brain, changing the autonomy or the identity or the agency of a patient, right? It's a fundamental question, because if what you're doing with your technology is altering what the capacity of that person to be themselves, that's a legal issue from my point of view, right? It's a responsibility issue. So that was a question that I was really shocked to hear, because I hadn't seen it in any of my forms, right, as a clinical development company. The other that I was very shocked is you put a lot of focus on the patient, but less focus on the societal implications of your technology, right? Who, for example, I attended in Washington a brain enhancement or cognitive enhancement workshop, right? Let's imagine you use my technology, my device, to make Edward, you, who is in the screen, smarter, right, Ed? So I'm going to use my technology and stimulate you, and you're going to be smarter, which is pretty cool, right? And I could probably, with some science and time. So if I'm going to make you smarter, who is going to have access to that technology? Mm-hmm. And one thing I love about the United States, which I don't see in Europe, is that they have workshops and debates that think 30 years, forward, right? So the discussion is, if these technologies enhance human, who is going to have access? The smarter are going to become smarter. Is it going to be, the rich that are going to become richer? Are we going to use the technology to bring the less smart people up to speed? Wow, I mean, pretty amazing debate, right? And who is going to regulate that? What is the role of, regulators in that, right? So that was another really interesting debate, right, that I had on the use of my technology. When we look at all these international research projects, right, and we look at what the papers on neuroethics are telling researchers, let me tell you, open my slides, even if you don't see them, at least I will tell you what they say. But when you're conducting a brain research project, there are a few guidelines that you have to follow based on neuroethics, and I'm going to mention them to you. The first one, of course, is the one that I mentioned on identity, right? If you're working with subjects, autonomy. A minute, let me grab the slide. Some technical issues here, but I'll solve them. Yes, here. So let me tell you. So these neuroethical questions to guide ethical research in the International Brain Initiative pose 4 questions, right? What are the intended and consequences of your technology, unexpected effects or misuse? This is a responsibility issue, right? Second, what is the data privacy? What is the privacy of participants? For example, if participants are wearing my device, I can stimulate them, but I can also record their brain data, right? Who owns that brain data, right? Can I share it as a company with third parties, right? data privacy, I'm sure you have covered that with AI as well, right? But this is really important because we are talking about EEG data, right? Maybe I find biomarker for mental health diseases, right, in the EEG data. Who's going to have access to that information, right? The other is, what are the long-term effects of these technologies? And unfortunately, I have to tell you, we don't know, right? The field is too new to understand what are the long-term effects of non-invasive brain stimulation, right? And then there is all this equity and socioeconomic gaps, right? Who is going to have access to this technology? So one of my questions when I go into these neuroethics boards is, should industry or neurotech companies like mine or newcomers in neurotech be subjected to guidelines? Should they be subjected to regulation, right? And I know in one of my slides, I was showing you the OECD workshop. They have these principles for responsible innovation of neurotechnology, which is a really good set of guidelines. But the reality is that nobody's applying them, right? So are guidelines enough? Should the industry be regulating themselves? Or should we get, government to interfere? And as you know, 2 days ago, there was a workshop by Columbia, Professor Rafa Yuste, and he has an initiative called the Neuro Rights Initiative. So one of the debates for our conversation is whether there should be a chapter on neuro rights in which humans, right, or the Constitution or the laws recognize your rights on the neurospace, meaning that you have the right to keep your brain, intact in terms of identity, autonomy, right, data privacy from your brain. So I think this is a good way to end my presentation, right, on the neuroethics and neuro rights debate of technologies like mine, right? And I said, I'm following regulations and under the watch of a lot of institutions, right? What about if you're a consumer company launching a consumer product tomorrow, right? You are not subject to all these regulations, right? So how should we cope with this? Or when Neuralink launches a consumer product, right? Who's going to regulate some of the issues that I mentioned? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ana. It's very nice because usually it's the policy person doing question to the technical one, but today Ana is already launching some question that Marcello can pick. But before that, I'm so curious about this word, and forgive me if I'm too naive, but I have some yes or no questions for you, Ana, just to understand and to let people understand a bit better, because I think, we are all very curious. Just very rapidly, does your tool allow you to detect emotions also of people, or emotions are too difficult to be detected?
Well, emotion is a very tricky word, right? It depends. I think that we have a matrix that it's more or less validated in which you can, using EEG, track what we call valence and arousal, right? So it's reaction of your brain signals to a particular stimulus, right? Okay. But emotion in terms I'm super sad or super happy or I'm in love, I don't think that's a reality. I mean, you can detect whether you react more or less to an input, and maybe more in the arousal or in the balance. But, there is not such a thing that I'm aware of, an EEG signature for love or happiness or, or sadness, for example.
Okay, great. This is very interesting because there was all this discussion about pseudoscience and emotion recognition. Then another yes or no question, and then I leave the floor to Marcello. Does your tool, can it be, like, if you want, exported for consumers? I know that now you use it just for hospitals, but can you say now I will sell it, I don't know, on the free market? Is it possible? I mean, not in legal term, but in technical term. It's easy to be used by a normal user or not?
So, what I have learned in my life in being an entrepreneur in the US is that, for example, if we talk about the FDA, which is the most restrictive, to me, agency in the world, right, in terms of, so it all depends on the intended use. If I say my device is helping patients with a particular disease, I am subject to the FDA scrutiny. I cannot sell the device to anybody unless I have an approval from the FDA, right? If now we are selling our device in more than 45 countries, but only to researchers. And to sell to researchers, we need either to have a medical approval or to have an IRB acceptance from the university that they are going to do non-significant risk research, right? So this is the way we are selling today. If I change Neuroelectrics and say, we are not going to help patients, what we are going to do is we are going to improve your mood or your attention, and you don't make any medical claims, then you are not under the watch of the agencies such as the FDA. You're on the consumer space. Mm-hmm. Then you may be having to deal with the federal, the consumer protection or FTC for mm-hmm. false claims, right? But our technology is being sold now, like companies like Halo Neuroscience. Halo had some headphones that wanted to do sports performance enhancement. So mm-hmm. their claim was, if you are an athlete and you receive stimulation, your performance will be better. That doesn't require any regulatory issue, right? So in principle, Halo could sell to consumers out there because their claim was not a medical claim. Yeah. But my personal belief on the ethical side, I do not think stimulation is ready for consumer time. We don't know enough about non-invasive brain stimulation to put it in, to do like consumer applications. That's why I think it's much better to start in the medical and clinical world until we fully understand what are the long-term effects of non-invasive brain stimulation.
Yeah, great. And we have welcome very much your approach. I mean, we didn't want to invite someone that does, very intrusive consumer mind reading. And so we welcome very much the fact that your company deals with real health issues and is very, very effective for that. So Marcello, we wait for your reactions, provocation, comments. I know that you have many, so the floor is yours.
Thanks, Gianclaudio, and thanks, Ana, for this very insightful presentation, and congratulations on the great work you do. I usually don't like to start discussion about neuroethics by starting from the problems that neurotechnologies raise. But I like to actually start it from the positive effects that neurotechnology can generate for individuals and society at large. And this is not a promotional statement, but it is actually, I believe, an ethically justified statement. I've been arguing that we have a moral obligation to accelerate neurotechnology innovation in order to deliver effective and safe therapeutic solutions for people in need. And it's very important for this audience to keep in mind that neurological and neuropsychiatric disorders represent a major component of the global burden of disease. They are a major cause of disability and death worldwide. And many neurological disorders affect millions of people worldwide. And as mentioned, epilepsy, but also Alzheimer's disease and other dementias, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, migraine. And I must say, I'm a chronic migraine patient, and I'm having a terrible headache right now. So I wish to live in a world in a few years' time where I can use a neuromodulation device to diminish the symptoms of my migraine and probably deliver a more effective speech than I possibly could today. So it is important to keep in mind that neurotechnology innovation is needed for individuals and society, especially for the benefit of patients. I think there is also an epistemic argument in favor of why we need neurotechnology innovation, and that's that you cannot understand what you cannot measure, and we need to measure the human brain in order to better understand the human brain, which is arguably one of the most complex systems in the universe, and consequently also one of the most poorly understood systems in the universe. And we have been making a lot of progress through neurotechnology to increase our understanding of the brain, but there is still a long way ahead. And I'm very hopeful that by developing technologies that can record and modulate activity in the human brain, we can also better understand ourselves. That being said, as any new technology, this is, I think, a general rule of technological innovation. Technology innovates faster than ethics and regulatory system can adapt. So we are now in an exciting phase of neurotechnology development that precisely because it is so exciting, it is also generating new challenges for ethicists and lawyers. It's hard to cluster all these challenges into main thematic families, but I'll try to make an attempt, especially because Ana has already mentioned many of the issues at stake. So the most pressing issue, I believe, that we're facing today is the problem of regulatory asymmetry between medical and non-medical applications. Ana has underscored this very much, and I fully agree with her. If you have a medical neurotechnology company and you develop products that have an explicit medical goal and a medical application, then you have to comply with several regulations. So first of all, your devices can only be used upon informed and voluntary consent. Your research has to be approved by an institutional review board or an ethics review committee, and the data you process are automatically categorized as health data. And as Ana said, then you also need to comply with medical device regulation. But as soon as you step out of the medical domain and you convert your medical claims into even paramedical claims, so you don't say that you can, that your device is designed to diagnose cognitive decline, but you can say that your device is designed to monitor cognitive performance. Then you might not need to comply with medical device regulation, and this generates a gray zone where potential breaches for ethics and data protection can occur. Now, this is something that regulators are currently working on, trying to identify all these gaps in international governance frameworks. But given the complexity of neurotechnology, I believe it's unlikely that a one-size-fits-all approach to governance can be effective. So I'm been promoting a multi-level approach to neurotechnology governance that, as the word entails, would operate at multiple levels, including binding regulation, both at the national and international level. But I think we also need to work on soft law approaches and ethical guidelines, because this model of soft law and ethical guidelines have proven to be very effective in other domains of medical technology innovation. And I also we need to create a culture of stewardship and trust among neurotechnology developers. So I think also self-governance by neurotechnology industry actors is important. And Ana and you as well have mentioned many times the OECD. This is precisely the work that we are doing with the OECD project on neurotechnology. We are really putting responsible innovation at the center. Unsurprisingly, the name of the soft law document that we developed is a recommendation of the Council responsible innovation neurotechnology, which currently sets the first international standard in the field. And the approach is really to incorporate ethical and legal considerations early on in the design and development phase of neurotechnologies, with the goal of avoiding potential pitfalls and also to maximize the benefits that these technologies can deliver for people in need. And I think here a warning may be helpful because I believe that if we do not address these ethical considerations in a consistent manner, then there is a risk that we will jeopardize the entire domain of neurotechnology innovation, and we may jeopardize the very attempt to improve the well-being of people through neurotechnology. As neurotechnologies spill over into the consumer domain, there is an increased risk that potential ethical breaches may take place, say data breaches, for example, and this could really be detrimental for the entire field. Now, a topic that has been widely debated in the ethics of neurotechnology is that relating to the status of neurotechnology generated data, which we've been labeling brain data here. You also use the word mental data. That's the one we use in our joint paper. I want to emphasize that these two categories are not fully overlapping, so they have a significant area of overlap, but I don't think that these two categories can be used interchangeably. And this is because the human brain is the fundamental biological substrate of mental functions, such as memory and consciousness and emotions you mentioned and so on. But it's also the fundamental biological substrate of other activities like respiration and other life maintaining processes. So the brain is a very complex organ. And a lot of information that we can read from the brain, or a lot of measurements that we can record from the brain, have nothing to do with mental information. But there is some degree of readability of mental information from brain-related data. Now, we could argue about what can be possibly read from brain data today. As some people in the audience may know, this is a very long-standing debate regarding mind reading. I personally think that today we cannot read thoughts in the strong sense. So neurotechnology cannot read thoughts in the sense that it cannot decode the semantic content of mental states. I think we are not even near to that, but with the increasing availability of brain-related data and the increasing power of especially machine learning models for data analysis, we can increasingly establish statistically significant correlations between certain patterns of brain activity, however measured, and some mental states. And this inferential power is something that has been now underlooked in international regulations and generates novel challenges for ethicists and lawyers. In particular, the possibility of establishing correlations between certain preference or set of preferences and certain patterns of brain activity can be particularly sensitive, and it's questionable whether the sensitivity of this information is being currently protected adequately, especially when it comes, as we said, to data generated by consumer neurotechnology applications. Then there are also issues, as Anna mentioned, of personal identity. So it's quite trivial to say that the brain is just not another organ. It's not just like any other organ, but it's probably the fundamental organ of human beings, precisely because it is also the fundamental site of mental faculties, and therefore intervening onto brain activity may have an impact on fundamental ethical notions such as personal identity and moral responsibility. And this potential is exacerbated by the incorporation of AI features into neurotechnology applications. We are just launching with colleagues in Canada and Germany a project called the Hybrid Mind, which is funded by Eranet Neuron. And our plan is really to investigate the ethical and legal implications of incorporating AI into brain-computer interfaces and understand whether this incorporation may lead to what we call a hybrid mind, which is a mind that consists both on human brain function and artificial intelligence components embedded in a neural interface. And then I want to conclude with an observation on the global justice and equity aspects of this, because neurotechnology sounds like a very first word technology. And therefore discussing the ethics of neurotechnology may sound like a first world problem. And I would argue that it should not be seen this way. Rather, in contrast, neurological and psychiatric disorders are a global problem. Actually, low and middle income countries are particularly affected by the global burden of neurological and psychiatric disorders, and they're often facing limited access to high quality healthcare to cope with these problems. And I think one important ethical challenge of neurotechnology is really to lower the cost of these devices and to increase access. The device that Anna has just shown has one very interesting feature, which is portability. And portability is key to maximize access. One thing is having extremely voluminous and super expensive brain scans that can only be hosted in medical facilities of the first word. Another thing is having portable devices that can be used on a large scale. And thereby increase access. And I think this issue of access and equity is particularly important when we talk about not only about medical treatment, but also about cognitive enhancement. This is also something that Anna has mentioned. So it is in principle possible to use, for example, neuromodulation for cognitive enhancement. There is moderate evidence that this is possible today, but there is no scientific reason to think that this will remain impossible in the years to come. So this is definitely something worth considering. And as we move into, we have this prospect of cognitive enhancement, it's very important to maximize access to these technologies in order to avoid that we exacerbate pre-existing socioeconomic inequalities. And I think I'll stop here for making the discussion interactive.
Thank you so much, Marcello. So many issues on the table. Also, this whole discussion about access and equity is extremely interesting. It was launched by Anna, and now Marcello is picking up because, we usually think that meritocracy is something based on the smartest win. Here, the richest win, because the richest become smartest through these tools, just to make it very, very even simplistic. The question that I made to Anna was, for example, if, what about emotions and pseudoscience? And I think Marcello gave a nice answer. He said, the emotion stuff, I mean, understanding the mood and the status of a person is beyond the hat, beyond the neural headset, is connecting to all data from, you know, big data, our actions online, etc. So probably the GDPR is actually the best place. I mean, data protection law is actually a good place where to start our discussion. And we can also talk about the AI regulation in the Q&A. So I open the floor. If there are any people that want to make any question or comment, you can use the chat or you can use the microphone. And while you type, I might have just a couple of questions for both. So a very rapid question to Marcello, just to make our audience to understand better. Can we say that, let's say, brain data, so data from neurotechnological tools, are identifiable data per se, so that even without the name of the person, even without any identifier, we can use this data, and just from this data, at least univocally relate this data to a person or not? You're muted.
Apologies. Yeah, absolutely. So most brain measurements are identifiable, and even more than that, most brain measurements are unique biometric identifiers. I see that Claude Castellucci is in the audience, and he is doing exciting research on this. The identifiability of brain data is an interesting topic, because there is also increasing research showing that you can use neurotechnology also to re-identify people from anonymous data. There was an interesting study that appeared, I think, in the New England Journal of Medicine last year, that attempted to re-identify participants in brain scan studies. I think it was structural MRI studies, and they were able to re-identify people from the MRI scans. So this is also an area of research that, but again, here I would decouple once again what I call neuroprivacy from mental privacy. So these two, I see this as two sets that intersect, but they are not fully overlapping. So to give you an example, Ana mentioned biomarkers. So if you use brain data to identify biomarkers of, say, Alzheimer's disease dementia, that is a type of information that is very sensitive, but has nothing to do with mental information. So it doesn't decode anything related to your mental states. Whereas if you have a certain pattern of brain activity that you can reliably correlate with a personal preference or with some emotional state, then you have an issue of mental privacy. And I think these two domains may overlap, but they're not supervenient.
Yeah, great, thank you. And then I have a couple of more questions for Ana. You were talking about all the potentiality of your tools. One question, again, very naive, but very triggering for for lawyers and other people. Do you think that your technology has the potential and the power also to influence the personality of a person or not? Because at the moment of course, your technology heals, cures some disease. Do you think that can be used not just enhancement, but also, I don't know, to shape personality? Because you mentioned the problem of identity and autonomy. Do you think that might be a risk for manipulating people through your device? I'm talking about even some dystopian example. Think at the Chinese example when they make an research experiment on Uyghurs, and they used emotional recognition system also to influence these people and see how this system works. I don't know. What do you think of manipulation? I know you're muted, sorry. Yeah. And I see that we have also a question in the Q&A. So while Anna tries to unmute herself, I have maybe a question for Marcello is, do you think that we need a definition of brain data in the GDPR, or is enough the current framework?
I think that's a very good question, and that's a question that many people in the neuroethics and neurolaw community are thinking about. I personally think that it could be a viable approach to see brain data as a special category within the GDPR, analogously to genetic data. Actually, brain data and genetic data share a lot of common features. They are both predictive of present and future health status and behavior. Brain data actually have an additional feature, which is their temporal resolution. So it is possible in principle to read brain activity in the real time. So I think this could be a viable approach to see them as a special category of health data within the GDPR. And it still remains to define how we deal with brain data obtained through consumer neurotechnology, if they also have to be considered health data by default, regardless of whether the technology used is medical or not. Another approach, which is the one that Gianclaudio and I have explored, is looking not so much at data types, but looking at data uses. So it's not so much the data type per se that is relevant here, but it's how you use it. So the kind of inferences that you can build from those data. And I think one particular interest that needs to be protected here is the freedom and privacy of the human mind. And this is, I think, a fundamental ethical interest that needs to be protected regardless of whether you make inferences about mental states from brain data or from other technologies. You know, you can use, for example, oh, wow, Anna is duplicating. That's pretty cool.
It's different.
Yeah, so you can make inferences about mental states even from non-neural technologies, say face recognition, emotion AI, affective computing, and so on. And if these inferences are reliable, then there is a challenge for mental privacy, which in my view is as big as the challenge that can be raised by neurotechnology today. But in the future, you know, unless you believe that, you know, mental faculties and emotions are something magic, then you ought to believe that we can find somewhere in the brain the signatures of those emotions and those mental states and so on. And therefore, you know, also protecting this forum internum is of particular importance from my point of view. And this is the reason why I've been arguing that we should also look at neurotechnology ethics from the perspective of fundamental human rights.
Yeah, and I think your answer is very well connected and actually already answers to Claude Castelluccia, who was typing that actually mental data are not just neural, but also something else from text data mining, Facebook, etc. And he says, do we treat these two types of mental data differently? So I try to summarize what Marcello was saying. Just because then I leave the floor to Anna for the other questions. Yeah, basically we were saying they can be held data, of course, if they are neural data, and so they have a special protection under the GDPR. Otherwise, we need to look at Article 9 of the GDPR, where you have data related to political or religious belief or sexual orientation, or uniquely biometrical data. But whatever is outside this scope, well, we should look at how risky is the data processing, but we cannot call this data sensitive per se, which is a bit problematic, and maybe it means that we should focus more on this. So Anna, you are back with your audio. So there was my question about manipulation, but there's another question by Istvan. Istvan is saying, what is your opinion on the responsibility of AI in mind reading and mind affecting? Where do you think should be the quality accuracy limit? So where we put the threshold of quality and accuracy? Because he says, Portability and low cost are important traits of well-being device, but in exchange, the accuracy of the recorded data is low, because it says if it's portable, probably the effectiveness is not so good, if I understand correctly. And so it says, where do we put the balance? So Anna, feel free to.
Well, I think that's the beauty, right, of technologies, because AI has advanced so much. Now you don't need high resolution EEG, right, of 256 channels to identify depending what things, right? So I think that's precisely the advantage of having AI and good computational tools like machine learning or deep learning, right? That maybe you can extract more data from an EEG that you would 30 years ago. So I think that the threshold is that the AI algorithms or the systems that are making diagnostics or that are, providing personalization of therapy should be really going through the same scrutiny as the devices, right? You have to go through the regulatory path. So as well for the software, you need to do large RCT trials to show that that algorithm is really identified whatever you're saying, right? So I think that to answer to that question, I think data should be going through the same path that a device or a drug, especially when we are talking about patients. In terms of the mind reading, like the judgment, like the changing personality issue, I haven't seen a lot of papers on the personality, but I have a collaborator in Harvard, Joshua Buchholz, that I love, that he made a study studying why criminals will commit a certain offense from a neuroscience perspective, right? So one of the things that Joshua did during his research is demonstrate that by doing non-invasive brain stimulation with TMS, you can change judgment. So I do not know about personality, but I do know about judgment. So again, this could be a potential dangerous avenue for, marketers or social media, right? If we have seen the influence of Facebook in the US elections, right? Just imagine, what a device can do, right? So I do believe that, for example, in implanted devices for Parkinson's, it is usually, there is a lot of ethical debate whether when you have an implanted device, the family members of the Parkinson disease, they say, oh, you're groupy and moody and in a bad mood, turn off the device. So, the concept of identity or personality there, it's also, a tricky one, right? Because I may be in a bad mood, but I don't have an implanted device. But if I'm receiving neuromodulation, right, the family environment will start to argue whether that's up to the device or to the person, right? Same with a non-invasive technology. They may say, turn off that device, it's giving you a bad mood.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Marcello wanted to add something, but he's muted.
Yeah, no, if I may just jump in, I have the same understanding of the scientific evidence today, but just like what we said about brain reading, I think it's very important to clarify the time scale here and distinguish what is currently possible given the current standard of technology development and what is logically possible. And if you want to discuss what is logically possible, then again, unless you think that there is something magic in the brain that generates your personality and your mood, then you have to accept that it is possible in principle to intervene on the neurobiological substrates of your preferences, mood, and personality, and therefore that some degree of manipulation is possible. And the more technology advances, the more this possibility can become concrete. There are already research projects that are taking place in the military sector, so among national security agencies such as DARPA in the United States that are attempting to use non-invasive neuromodulation, so the kind of technology that Anna explained, for making soldiers more resistant to fatigue and more capable to operate when sleep deprived. It is not unimaginable to use the same technology to make soldiers more belligerent, for example, because the neurobiological pathways of aggressivities are as well understood as those of fatigue. So, you know, once we enter that domain, manipulation is potentially possible. And that's why we need to be more, you know, proactive in the way we address these ethical issues.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I will ask one other question to Ana, because there is a, I don't know if I can pronounce this name in the chat. I see the surname Puskasu, I think, and she asks, or he asks, and this question I will ask to Ana. What do you see the most promising neurostimulation applications beyond the hospital, outside the hospital? What do you see the most clinically proven neurostimulation applications that we can do?
You mean clinically proven or non-clinical? It wasn't clear.
The question was, is it clinically proven? But I mean, we can even be in general.
As I said, you know, I'm working on epilepsy and depression.
Yeah.
Another area of neurostimulation where I think there is a huge opportunity, and we're also working on, is, of course, neurodegeneration, dementia, Alzheimer's. There are beautiful papers in which we have collaborated on gamma oscillations, gamma stimulation. This is pretty huge when you consider that there is nothing that works today for Alzheimer's or dementia. So I think that's a pretty interesting area to look into. I love anything that is not purely medical, but as a scientific question, I love the field of consciousness, right? And we work with people like Stephen Loris and others, in which, you know, what does consciousness mean, and can you alter it by the means of stimulation? So this relates to what Marcello was saying. Consciousness involves sleep, meditation states, you know, all these states of the mind, right? I love the locked-in patients studies we've been doing for years now with Niels Baumer and others, in which you really try to use these technologies not only to do BCI, to allow locked-in patients to communicate, but also to see if you can really have an impact, right, on their level of consciousness with neuromodulation. So I think there are some pretty exciting, you know, if you think of the field of anesthesia and sleep, is such an old world, such an old time. The way anesthesia, or the way we are put into sleep nowadays, is crazy. It's awful. There's no dynamic, you know, real-time brain monitoring when you're on anesthesia, right? So all these areas of sleep, consciousness, I think, you know, if you think now of psychedelics, right, all the current of psychedelic research in the US or also in Europe, you know, all these areas are fascinating, right? The combination of psychedelics with EEG and stimulation. I think there's so many things, and I don't know what will happen with Neuralink or Kernel, but the fact that these pretty well-known entrepreneurs are getting into the field is going to create a whole new array of pretty cool applications, right? But I am very fascinated by the field of consciousness in general.
Great. And then one last question to you as a business person. This is my question, and then I have a final question for Marcello, and we need to close. A question to you. I mean, Ana, you operate in the US and in Europe. As an entrepreneur, what do you think is the legislation that puts you more at ease? I mean, do you prefer to operate in the US, considering the existing legislation, existing limits? Or do you think that Europe is less burdensome? Just you know, to invest in this field in Europe and in America, what is the most how to say lenient? What is the most troublesome legislation? I don't know.
Well, I'm very proud to have started my company and been born my company in Spain and in Barcelona, right? But I think that there is talent in Europe. We have really good science in Europe, but we are really bad at scaling up companies, right? So I think that, you know, we are really bad in we are good in turning money into science and bad in turning science into money, right? So scaling up requires going through the US and the FDA. Why? Because it's a single market. I mean, even if I get a regulatory ease in Europe, it's a nightmare to sell in Germany, in the Netherlands, France, with all these health systems and reimbursement. In the US, once you get into the US, you get FDA approval and reimbursement, you have access to all these millions of patients, which are just the same, even if they're in Texas or in Massachusetts, right? Asia, China is the other big play, right? You know, the market is so big in terms of millions of patients, and it's homogeneous as well. So I think that the problem with Europe is that it's very complicated to access the market because it's very fragmented, right? So if you need to scale, and I believe entrepreneurs in neurotech have to scale to have a significant impact, right? Because patients with epilepsy or Alzheimer are not in Europe; they're all over the world. So I think you have the real responsibility to really make your technology accessible to every patient wherever they are, right? So I think that's why the move to the US, I think, is a good one if you really want to scale up your company.
Yeah, thank you so much. And you bridge with the last question that I wanted to ask to Marcello, but I will also collect the one from Cesar, and then we say goodbye to everyone. The last question, because you talked about the European market. Now we have something that could do like uniformity, homogeneity in the European market, which is, for example, the AI regulation. Of course, neurotechnology is not just AI, but we have this one. So I think that part of our audience is also interested in this. So Marcello, do you think that the new AI regulation is adequate for the challenge or not? There are many things to say. We have just a few minutes. And then the second question was, again, because I saw that we really triggered a thread about mental data. So Cesar is asking, what is the added value of mental data to the sensitive data list in the GDPR? So I know it's impossible to answer in a few minutes to these two questions, but I trust you. You're muted.
I will start from the last one and then try to connect it to your question on the AI regulation. I think I agree with Cesar that brain data are a fairly straightforward category. At least they are to me, as long as they are defined as any quantitative data regarding the anatomy, structure, activity, and function of the human brain. But as Claude has said in the chat, brain, the fundamental sensitivity of brain data is twofold, right? On the one end, they are predictive of health status. And this predictivity of health status have little to do with inferencing mental states, right? So brain data can be used to infer, say, prodromal signatures of brain disease. And this information is sensitive because, if my employer finds out that I have prodromal signatures of, say, early onset Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease, then this may lead to discrimination against me, like earlier contract termination, or even, if this information falls into the hands of my health insurance providers. That's a problem. But I think this is a problem that, the GDPR is very well equipped to address. The problem where I am less certain that the GDPR is well equipped to address, and I must say also that the new AI regulation is well equipped to address, is about inferring mental states from somebody's brain data. And this is a new degree of sensitivity because of many reasons. So first of all, brain data are largely below the threshold of conscious experience. The data protection is often predicated upon my conscious ability to filter, the flow of information and determine which kind of information I want to share and which one I want to seclude. Brain data being below the threshold of conscious experience are unlikely subject to this privilege. So there is a lot of background information, a lot of noise that you can measure. And so it's very possible to, for example, collect redundant data. So, people can enroll in a neuromarketing study in order to, record their brain activity in relation to one specific purpose. But it's very easy to record redundant information related to other purposes without the authorization and even without the awareness of the end users. And then I've been arguing that mental information is the fundamental substrate of personal identity. That personal identity is ultimately mental information. We are, there are several cognitive neuroscientific theories of personal identity, but one of the most corroborated ones is that of a psychological continuity. So we are what we are because there is some degree of continuity over time across our mental states. And therefore, the prospect of revealing information about our mental states could also generate new insights on fundamental prerequisites of personal identity. And the prospect of intervening onto brain data through, for example, neuromodulation also opens prospects of intervening onto somebody's personal identity. Again, this is the reason, one of the reasons why I've proposed that we need to look at these issues also from a fundamental rights perspective. But I don't know if this answers both of your questions. I'm happy to, well, maybe to give Cesar a couple of seconds to see if he has a follow-up on this.
Sorry, now I was the muted one. Yeah, I think we are running out of time.
Okay.
Yeah, there was this follow-up discussion between Claude and me about emotions, because emotions now is a lot under the lens, you know, because also for the AI regulation, there was this whole discussion about the fact that emotional recognition is not considered high risk. Emotional recognition is just considered limited risk. And for us, it's, I mean, for me, for you, I think, Marcello, and for other people, I think this is quite tricky, because emotional recognition, if it exists, it should be anyway considered at least high risk, because the only safeguard that we have for the limited risk AI in the new proposal is just to inform the people that there is an AI. That's all. And, you know, it's not enough if they can recognize me and maybe categorize me based on my emotions or even based on other things. And even the GDPR about emotions is not so clear, because, yeah, if you get emotions from a biometric thing, yes, it's sensitive data because it's biometric data uniquely identifying someone. But if you get it from Facebook, it's not per se sensitive data. But then we have high risk definition, which can help. So I think I don't know if Anna wanted to say something at the end, some statement, or if she's okay with what we said, or some more comments, and then we can then we can close. Yeah.
I think that the only thing I would say, you know, is that in the spite of technologies like mine, which you have seen that exist today, I think that many of the things that worry people cannot be done with current technologies today, right? The mind reading, the mind influencing. So I would just be a bit more cautious about alarming the people, but I really think it's great to have the conversation now, because I think that with science and time, a lot of the things that will worry us today will be possible. So having this conversation and setting up the frameworks that allow us to prevent, you know, a misuse or unintended consequences, I think it's super important. But I honestly think that it's not that easy to develop the technologies and the applications and the software that a lot of the people are having, you know, fear, right, that they will influence them or, you know, or access their minds. So I just wanted to be cautious about that. And I think that, as Marcello said, there is a beautiful side of neurotech. The millions of people that we can help that they don't have a solution today, the millions of people that cannot communicate and may communicate with a BCI, is just beautiful as a field, right? So we shouldn't be as cautious as to stop the whole field for things that cannot be done today and that we don't know when it will be, if ever, done, right? So, but, you know, we just have to be careful about the steps, but really push neurotech forward.
Yeah. I see Marcello wants to do a final statement.
Oh, no, I was actually just nodding, because I agree. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I've been reiterating quite obsessively that we really need to be clear about the time scale of our concerns. But it's very important to distinguish distinguish what is currently possible from what is potentially possible. But we also we must not ignore what is potentially possible by disregarding the logical possibility based on current states of technology, because as we know, technology innovates over time. I see here a lot of analogies between the debate that is taking place within the AI community between narrow AI and strong AI, AGI, with the exception that whereas we don't fully know whether artificial general intelligence is possible, we have very good reasons to believe that if you can measure enough brain activity and build strong causal models related to brain activity, then you can also make inferences about the human mind. Because we have to date no scientific reason to believe that the human mind is something else than something enabled by the brain. And I think this is why focus on neuroethics and neurorights is important, because it's very hard to exercise your right without having control over your own mind, because all our behavior and language and so on are nothing but externalizations of our own mind. Therefore, protecting the freedom of the mind is the fundamental substrate of any other freedom, at least in my view.
Great. So there's a lot food for thought, for discussion, for whatever. Thank you so much, Marcello and Ana. It was extremely dense and intense, and there's much more to be said in the future. So thank you so much to the audience for the questions. Let's keep posted. There will be this event will be put on YouTube, so you'll be able, if you lost something. And next event will be 28th of June. We will be back on privacy enhancing technology, I think, and it will be the final tech talk, at least for this academic year. Thank you again to everyone. Have a good evening, afternoon, wherever you are, and see you soon. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Gianclaudio. Bye bye.
Bye.